Ruth. I had heard of the land of Israel, the land of God's people. As a little girl, my favorite stories were about that land and how God, their God, had fought fierce battles for them and given them victory. Oh, how good it would be to have a God who fights battles for you. I often wondered about that land, but also about its people. They had to be special. Even though I had heard of the hostility between my land of Moab, and Israel, a dream was birthed inside of me. I dreamt of visiting that land and of meeting its people. Would my dream ever come true? As I grew older, I concentrated on becoming a woman, and soon enough I was ready for marriage. So I put my dream aside. But all the young men from Moab seemed not to notice me. Was I that ugly? Maybe not. Maybe God simply had better plans for me. My mother trained me to be a hard-working woman, one who would make her husband and her children very happy. However, I continued to be bothered by the fact that none of the men of Moab, of my land, approached me. My dream wedding was fast receding from my mind. Just then, suddenly, there was news about a famine in God's land. Could it be possible? Could this be one of the suddenlies and the just thens that God had introduced into my life when I was a young girl? A famine in God's own land. A famine in God's own land? How could that be? You see, I had heard that sometimes the people of God rebelled against him and bowed down to other gods. So he would let them fall onto hard times. Sometimes he let their enemies attack them, while at other times he allowed them to face famine. However, because their God was indeed a just God, he would hear them when they repented and cried out to him. He would then send them a judge to rule them and to fight their enemies for them. But this time, could it be that the enemy was famine? I wonder if that famine was a sign of God's wrath against his people, against his own people. Had their offense been that grave? Well, due to that famine, a man called Elimelech and his wife Naomi and his two sons, Mahlon and Chilion, came to Moab. They were from Israel, from the land of God's people. I could not believe it. My dream was fast evolving right before me. They had come. Could it be that God had heard me? Could it be that he had allowed that famine into his land just so my dream could be realized? I'm telling you, it seemed as if my life began. As if it started as soon as that family came to Moab. Unfortunately, the old man died before I could get to know him. He had seemed like such a nice man. But suddenly, one of his sons noticed me. Mahlon noticed me. He seemed to see something in me that no man in Moab had ever seen before. He made me feel like a queen. We soon got married, and my marriage was great. It was a beautiful marriage. My mother-in-law, Naomi, was different. She was not like the other mothers-in-law that I had heard the other brides talk about. She was very, very loving. She taught me how to prepare the food that they loved to eat in the land of Bethlehem, Judah. She also taught me the role of a wife in Israel. My husband, Mahlon, told me stories. He told me so many stories about the God of Israel and how he had carried his own people out of the land of Egypt, out of more than 400 years of bondage, just as he had promised their father Abraham. Mahlon also told me of the battles that their God continued to fight for his people. I could not get enough of his stories. But suddenly he died. My husband Marlon died without giving me children. It was so sad that my mother-in-law was left with no husband and no sons. And to everyone, including her, including Naomi, my mother-in-law, it seemed that I would return to my father's house. But no matter how much she tried to, she could not convince me to do so. I could not return. I felt that Naomi and I had crossed the boundary of daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. We had become friends and confidants. I could not bring myself to leave her. Her God had become my God, and her people had become my people. Even if she tried to convince me of the futility of staying with her, seeing that she would not give me another son to marry, it did not matter to me. But Opa, my sister-in-law, whose husband Kilon had died as well, finally agreed to return to her people. But I clung to Naomi. I could not bear to leave her. She and I had become so close that I felt terrible at the thought of leaving her. The death of her husband and 2 sons had clearly left its mark on her. She had become bitter. Seeing her that way made me sad, and it was one of the many things that made me cling to her. I did not know that that was the beginning of the realization of my dream. It was a long journey to Bethlehem, Judah. But the God of Israel, who had now become my God, watched over us and carried us there safely. Now, since Naomi and I needed to survive, I looked for work. I told Naomi that I would go to the field and glean ears of grain after him, in whose sight I would find grace. Little did I know that that man would end up becoming my future husband. Thank God it was harvest season. It was not that hard finding work. You see, it was a practice for the Israelites, but also a command from the God of Israel that some sheaves be left behind for the widows and orphans to glean after the reapers had been through the field. Therefore, I was certain that I would not go home empty-handed. The field that I found myself working in belonged to a man called Boaz, who arrived from Bethlehem shortly after I began working. Surprisingly, he noticed me immediately, and I saw him inquiring about me from the servant that he had set over the reapers. For a moment I thought he was going to chase me away, but he did not. It was even more surprising that he addressed me directly. He told me not to go and glean from any other field, and that I was to stay close to his maidens. He told me to keep my eyes on the field after his maidens. Can you imagine? He also cautioned the young men not to touch me. This Boaz also gave me the liberty to take a drink from what the men drew out of the well if I was thirsty. He seemed such a nice man. He seemed like such a nice man. I was so overwhelmed that I fell on my face and bowed my face to the ground. I bowed myself to the ground. Why have I found so much grace in your eyes that you should take knowledge of me, seeing that I'm a stranger? I asked. And he answered and said that he had been told all that I'd done for Naomi, my mother-in-law, since the death of my husband. He also said that he had heard about how I'd left my own father and mother, needless to mention my land, to come to a people that I did not know. Of course, having taken on the God of Israel as my God must have been a big part of it, because he then blessed me and said that the Lord under whose wings I had come to trust should recompense me for my work and reward me fully. I was so moved by his words and his blessing that I asked that I would continue to find favor in his sight. This man, Boaz, comforted me and spoke kindly to me, yet I was not one of his handmaidens. His kindness did not end there, however. He went on to tell me to avail myself at mealtime, eat of the bread, and dip my muzzle in the vinegar. So, at mealtime, I sat among the reapers, and he, Boaz, passed me parched grain, and I ate until I was satisfied. I did not know it then, but when I arose to glean some more, he commanded his men to let me glean among the sheaves as well. This was an honor. He asked them not to reproach me when I did. How noble of him! Also, unknown to me, was the fact that Boaz told his men to let some handfuls fall on purpose for me, just for me, so that I would glean them, and that they were not to rebuke me. His men were not to rebuke me. Indeed, I had received favor before the God of Israel, but also before this man called Boaz. Oh, he's such a righteous man. So I gleaned until evening, and when I bit out all that I had gleaned, it was a full ephah of barley. When I got home that evening, I gave Naomi what I had reserved for her at mealtime. I excitedly told her all about my day, and it was then that I learned that this Boaz was actually a near kinsman to us. He was one of our closest kinsmen. It did not take me long to appreciate this God, who I had only heard about in stories. The way I had found work in a field of one of our closest kinsmen, and then found favor with him, was clearly the hand of God, which was clearly the hand of the God of Israel. As I reflected upon what Boaz had said about me, I knew that I did all that I did for Naomi because I considered her not only my mother-in-law, but also my friend. But everyone, including Boaz, saw it as something extraordinary, which was not such a bad thing, because that good report had gone ahead of me. He had heard so many good things about me before he and I actually met. It had to be God. It had to be the God about whom I had heard so much in stories. Anyway, all through the barley harvest and the wheat harvest too, I gleaned close to his maidens. I gleaned close to Boaz's maidens until the very end. Now, I could tell that this man Boaz was interested in me as a man is to a woman, and I was not exactly immune to him. But as much as I tried to act indifferent, I think Naomi saw through me, and oh, was she excited. This fueled her desire to find me rest. It fueled her desire to find me a man to settle down with. Suddenly, I could see my life beginning to take shape again. Naomi then came up with a brilliant idea. The night that Boaz was to winnow barley on the threshing floor. According to Naomi, that was my best opportunity. It was the best opportunity for me. So, she told me to take a bath, anoint myself with oil, and to put on my best clothes too. She told me to then go down to the threshing floor. But Naomi was very clear that I was not to let myself known to any man until Boaz finished eating and drinking. She also told me to mark the place where he would lie that night, that I was to go in and uncover his feet and to lay down. Naomi told me that he would then tell me what to do. She told me Boaz would tell me what to do. I agreed to do all that she told me to do. And when Boaz had eaten and drank wine, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. So, ever so softly, I went over to him and uncovered his feet and took my place right where Naomi had instructed me to lie. Now, at midnight, Boaz was startled, and when he turned around, he noticed a woman on the threshing floor, a place where women were not allowed to go. He then asked me who I was, and I told him my name. I told him that this is Ruth. I then told him that he was my near kinsman. For a moment there, I was scared that he was going to scold me, but he did not. Indeed, he blessed me. He commended me not to have gone after the rich or the poor young men. Even though I could actually tell that he liked me, I was so moved by his willingness to do all that I required him to do. Can you imagine? He said that the entire city of his people knew me as a virtuous woman. He also said that there was a kinsman nearer than he. But then he said that he would meet with him the next day. Boaz meant to find out if the nearer kinsman was willing to do the part of a kinsman to me. Now, what that really meant was that Boaz would find out if the closer kinsman was willing to take on Mahlon's family's inheritance and to marry me as well. Oh, I was so anxious. You see, the tradition in Israel is that in order for his name to be kept alive, the field of the dead has to be redeemed and the widow purchased as well. Well, the city gate is the place where such important transactions take place and such important discussions take place as well. So Boaz met with a near kinsman. He declined to redeem it. That was good news to me. Therefore, he and Boaz agreed that Boaz would redeem it. It was quite surprising that it did not take long for me to become Boaz's wife. The men, the witnesses at the city gate, also blessed me. They prayed that God, the Lord of Israel, would make me like Rachel and Leah, names that I'd only heard about in stories. They also pronounced that our house would be like that of Perez, that Tamar bore to Judah. Boaz and I then got married, and I found love again. Unlike before, it did not take me long to conceive. I bore a son. Our son's name is Obed. And now as I hold him in my arms, as I hold my son Obed in my arms, I know that he will be very famous one day, just as the women told Naomi when they held him in their arms. Oh, I know that I shall be like one of those women they talked about in the stories. I know that I shall be like Rachel and Leah, who between them birthed nations. I know that I shall be famous. Oh, I'm already famous because I hold my son Obed in my arms. Oh, I trust that the God of Israel will look after me. Ruth will become famous. Ruth is a famous name now in the land of Israel, the land of God's own people.